The light she found in the dark. They said grief fades with time, but for Evelyn Grace, time only made the silence louder. At 58, she'd lost her husband, her home, and every reason to wake up in the morning. The world kept moving, but she didn't. Days blurred into nights, nights into prayers she no longer believed would be answered. Until one small act of kindness, a bowl of soup, a stranger's smile, lit something inside her she thought was gone forever. This is the story of a woman who walked through the dark and found her light again. A story about second chances, quiet courage, and the kind of hope that doesn't just heal you, it helps you heal others. Because sometimes the light we find in the dark is the light we were meant to share. They say every city hums with the heartbeat, but for Evelyn, that sound had gone quiet. Once upon a time, she used to wake before sunrise, coffee brewing, old records spinning, her apartment alive with the smell of hope. But now, mornings came like ghosts. She moved through them the way a shadow does, quiet, unseen, unneeded. She was 58, and in a city that never stopped moving, she felt like the only one standing still. Her husband had passed away 3 years earlier, a sudden heart attack that stole the man she'd built her whole world around. They'd been together since she was 21. He was her anchor, her laughter, her reason to come home. And when he was gone, it felt like someone had turned off all the lights in her world. Friends tried to visit at first. They brought casseroles, flowers, promises to check in soon. But grief is heavy. And after a while, even the kindest people grow tired of carrying what they don't understand. So Evelyn learned to hide her pain. She smiled when she needed to, said, "I'm fine," when she wasn't, and let the world forget her, one unanswered call at a time. The apartment grew smaller each day. She stopped cooking, stopped reading, stopped listening to the music they once danced to. The silence wasn't just around her. It lived inside her. And as months turned into years, she started to wonder if her story had already ended, if she was just waiting for her turn to fade. But the funny thing about life is, sometimes it doesn't whisper hope back through people. Sometimes it sends it through pain itself. It was a cold winter morning when she lost her job. 30 years of loyalty to the same downtown office, and in the span of a 5-minute meeting, she was told her position had been eliminated. No ceremony, no thank you. Just a box for her belongings and a final paycheck. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with bills scattered like fallen leaves. The heating barely worked. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the quiet realization that she had nothing left to lose. She whispered to herself, "Maybe that's the worst part of life. When you've already lost everything that ever mattered." But in that same breath, something small inside her whispered back, "Or maybe that's the moment you finally get to begin again." The next morning, Evelyn walked outside before the sun rose. The streets were empty, the air bit at her skin, and for the first time in years, she really looked at the city around her. The flickering streetlights, the homeless man sleeping near the corner, the woman pushing a grocery cart full of recyclables. Everyone had their own kind of struggle, and somehow that thought made her pain feel less lonely. She bought a cheap cup of coffee from a cart near the park, and when the vendor smiled and said, "You're early today," Evelyn smiled back, a real one, small but honest. That night, she opened her old notebook, the one she hadn't touched since her husband's passing. She wrote, "I don't know what comes next, but if I'm still here, maybe there's a reason." A week later, while walking home, she passed by a small community shelter. Through the glass windows, she saw volunteers handing out food and blankets. Their laughter, their energy, it stirred something inside her. The next morning, she returned. She didn't plan it. She just walked in. An older woman behind the desk looked up and said, "Are you here to help, sweetheart?" Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "I think I'd like to try." They handed her an apron, showed her how to serve soup, and within an hour, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. The faces she met weren't broken. They were human, raw, alive. People who'd lost homes, jobs, families, yet somehow still found ways to smile. That night when she came home, she didn't turn on the TV. She didn't reach for wine. She just sat by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, and whispered, "Thank you." Because for the first time in forever, she didn't feel empty. That's how it began. Not with the grand plan, not with sudden healing, but with one small act of showing up. And in that single act, Evelyn unknowingly stepped into the first light she'd seen in years. Because sometimes the light doesn't come to find you. You find it by daring to step into the dark. When the world spoke softly again. The first few weeks at the shelter were quiet. Not the kind of quiet that hurts, but the kind that listens. Evelyn learned faces before names. A man who always whistled before asking for soup. A woman who folded every napkin she used, as if saving something sacred. A little girl who never spoke, but drew sunflowers on every paper cup. It was strange how people who had so little could still carry light in their eyes. Every morning, Evelyn would tie her apron, stand behind the serving table, and feel the world come alive again. One smile, one warm bowl, one moment at a time. No one there knew her story. No one asked about her loss. They just accepted her as she was. And somehow, that was enough. One afternoon, while restocking shelves, she met Marcus, a tall man with a quiet voice and a limp in his walk. He'd been volunteering there for years. Didn't talk much, but when he did, his words carried weight. "You remind me of someone," he said one day. Evelyn looked up, curious. "Who's that?" He smiled. "Someone who stopped giving up." It took her a moment to understand what he meant, but that night, lying in bed, those words replayed in her mind. Someone who stopped giving up. She hadn't realized that's what she was doing, stopping the slow surrender that had once swallowed her whole. As winter melted into spring, the city began to change. Sunlight crept through windows, birds returned to rooftops, and Evelyn, for the first time in years, started to feel alive. She started taking long walks after her shifts, sometimes stopping at the park to watch children play, sometimes sitting by the fountain just to feel the breeze. She started cooking again. Simple meals, but they filled the air with warmth. She found her old record player, and when the first notes of their favorite song filled the room, she didn't cry this time. She smiled. Because now every song wasn't a reminder of what she'd lost. It was a thank you for what she'd once had. A few months later, the shelter director asked her to help with something new. A mentorship program for women starting over. Women who'd lost jobs, families, homes, some barely holding on. Evelyn hesitated. What could I possibly teach them? She asked. The director smiled gently. Hope, dear. You could teach them hope. And just like that, Evelyn found herself sitting in front of 6 women, each with their own story of loss, pain, and survival. She didn't lecture, she just listened. At first, they were distant, eyes tired, arms crossed. But when Evelyn shared her own story, the night she lost her husband, the day she lost her job, and the moment she almost gave up, the room grew still. Because she wasn't speaking like a counselor. She was speaking like one of them. By the end of the session, a few of them smiled. One even said quietly, "If you can find your way back, maybe I can too." That night, Evelyn cried, not from sadness, but from the quiet miracle of feeling useful again. Weeks turned into months. The mentorship grew. Evelyn became the heart of it. She helped women write job applications, find apartments, rebuild confidence. And though her hands ached some mornings and her knees reminded her of her age, her soul felt younger than ever. She laughed again. She started dressing in colors again. And sometimes, when she caught her reflection in a shop window, she almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Because that woman wasn't broken anymore. She was becoming. But life never moves in straight lines. And just when things begin to bloom, the world tests whether your roots are strong enough to hold. It was a late summer evening. The shelter was closing early because of an approaching storm. Evelyn was packing supplies when a young woman burst through the door, soaked, shaking, eyes wide with fear. Her name was Lena, 19 years old, homeless for weeks. "I don't want to go back there. They'll hurt me again." Evelyn's heart clenched. She'd seen pain before, but there was something in that girl's voice, the sound of someone standing on the edge. She wrapped her arms around her and whispered, "It's okay, baby. You're safe now." That night, Evelyn stayed with her at the shelter. She listened to her story, the abuse, the fear, the hopelessness. And as Lena cried herself to sleep, Evelyn sat beside her, watching the rain trace lines across the window. In that moment, she understood something powerful. The light she'd found wasn't just for her, it was meant to be shared. Because somewhere out there, someone was standing in the same dark she once lived in, waiting for a voice to whisper, "You're not alone." The next morning, Evelyn made a decision. She met with the shelter director and said, "I want to start something new. A program just for women like her, those running from pain, those who don't believe they're worth saving." The director smiled, eyes shining. "What will you call it?" Evelyn thought for a moment and then said softly, "The Light Room." They started small, just a few folding chairs, a donated coffee pot, and a little sign that read, "The Light Room, a place to begin again." Word spread. Soon more women came, and every week Evelyn would stand at the front, look into those weary faces, and say the same thing. "I know what it's like to lose everything, but I also know what it's like to find yourself again, right in the middle of the dark." For the first time in years, Evelyn no longer the fire that stayed. Years passed, and the city began to remember her name. Evelyn Grace, founder of the Light Room, the woman who turned her grief into something sacred. The small room that once held 6 women now filled with dozens every week. Some came with bruises that hadn't yet faded. Some came with hearts that didn't believe in tomorrow. But each one left carrying a little more light than they came with. Evelyn never saw herself as a savior. She was simply a witness, a hand that once trembled, now steady enough to hold someone else's. Her hair turned silver, her steps slower, but her presence grew larger than life. Everywhere she went, people smiled a little easier. They called her Miss Grace, or sometimes just Miss E. One afternoon, while sorting through donations, Lena, the same young woman Evelyn had once found trembling in the rain, walked in holding a folder. "I got the job," she said, tears in her eyes. "I start Monday." Evelyn dropped the paper she was holding and hugged her tight. "That's a wonderful baby. You did it." Lena shook her head. "No, we did." Evelyn smiled through tears. Moments like that were her reward. Proof that even the smallest kindness could echo for years. As the years went on, Evelyn began training others to carry on the work. She wanted the Light Room to live beyond her, to grow into something she could never finish alone. But even in her busiest days, she never forgot where it all began. Sometimes, late at night, she'd walk to the edge of the city and sit on that same park bench where she once watched life pass her by. The same sky, the same stars, but a very different woman. Sometimes life takes everything just to show you what truly matters. We break, we fall, and for a while, we forget who we are. But then something or someone reminds us that the story isn't over yet, that even in the quiet after the storm, there's still a pulse, still a light. Evelyn Grace found hers not in what she lost, but in what she gave. And that's the truth about healing. It doesn't come when life gets easier. It comes when you decide to keep loving, even after everything tried to break you. So if you're walking through your own dark tonight, remember her story. Hold on to that small light inside you, because one day it might just be the very thing that helps someone else find their way home.